The first seed was a perfect, polished tear of obsidian caught into the porcelain basin of his sink. And for a long, still moment, Alex simply stared, his breath caught somewhere between a gasp and another cough. It lay there, stark and black against the white. No bigger than a peppercorn, but impossibly smooth, impossibly dark. It seemed to drink the light from the bathroom bulb above. He prodded it with a fingertip. It was hard, cool, and inert. A faint, dry rattle in his chest was the only remnant of the hacking fit that had produced it. He rationalized it instantly, a skill honed by a lifetime of quiet anxiety. He'd had a burrito for lunch, heavy on the cilantro and toasted spices. It must have been a burned cumin seed, or perhaps a black peppercorn he'd somehow inhaled instead of swallowed. It was unusual, certainly, but not impossible. The world was full of minor, absurd accidents. With a shiver of mild revulsion, he turned on the faucet and watched as the water washed the tiny black object away. A swirl of darkness vanishing down the drain. He gargled with mouthwash until his gums tingled. The aggressive mint flavor a welcome assault on his senses, scrubbing away the memory of the thing. For 3 days, the memory faded, becoming just another strange anecdote his mind had filed away. Life resumed its placid, predictable rhythm. He worked his data entry job from his small apartment, the clicks of his keyboard a steady metronome to his days. He ate his solitary meals while watching old documentaries. He spoke mostly to the checkout clerk at the corner grocery and occasionally to Mrs. Gable from the apartment next door, a woman whose kindness was as suffocating as the cheap potpourri that seeped from under her door. On the 4th day, it happened again. He was laughing at a line in a movie. A genuine, rare bark of a laugh that caught in his throat, turning into a strangled choke. He bent over, fist pressed to his sternum, his body convulsing with a dry, unproductive cough. Then, the familiar rattle, he stumbled to the kitchen, spitting into a paper towel. This time, there were 3 of them. Identical, obsidian beads, glistening under the kitchen light. The rationalizations came slower this time, stumbling over the mounting evidence. 3 of them. That wasn't an accident. He hadn't eaten anything with seeds. He'd been meticulously careful, an unspoken dread guiding his grocery choices since the first incident. He unfolded the paper towel on the counter, his heart thudding a nervous, heavy rhythm against his ribs. They were perfect ovals, without a single facet or flaw. Their surfaces reflecting the distorted, fisheye version of his own pale, worried face. He picked one up. It felt heavier than it should, dense and solid. He placed it on the cutting board and tried to crush it with the flat of a knife. The blade slipped, skittering across the seed's glossy surface with a sharp tink. He pressed harder, his knuckles white nothing. He struck it with the handle of the knife, a sharp crack echoing in the quiet room. The seed remained pristine. The wooden cutting board now bore a small, circular dent. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into the corners of his mind. This was not normal. This was not a burnt spice. He carefully folded the paper towel, tucking the 3 seeds inside, and hid it in the back of his sock drawer, as if hiding the evidence could hide the reality of it. The nights became the worst part. The old apartment building, usually a comforting cacophony of groaning pipes and distant traffic, began to produce new sounds. A soft, persistent rustling from within the walls, too rhythmic for rats, too soft for plumbing. It sounded like the dragging of dry leaves or the slow, patient unfolding of immense, papery wings. He'd lie in bed, rigid, tracking the sound as it seemed to crawl through the space between his wall and Mrs. Gable's. He pressed his ear to the plaster, feeling a faint, almost imperceptible vibration that hummed in the bones of his skull. His anxiety began to manifest physically. His throat felt perpetually tight, a phantom tickle that promised another coughing fit. He developed a strange sensitivity to the air in his apartment. It felt thick, heavy with moisture, like the inside of a greenhouse. The windows, painted shut years ago, now seemed like the sealed glass of a terrarium. Even the water from the tap had acquired a new taste. A faint, metallic tang overlaid with something else, something cloyingly sweet and organic, like fresh soil after a rain. A week later, he woke up choking. The cough was violent, a brutal spasm that tore from his lungs, leaving him breathless and dizzy. He collapsed onto the floor, his vision swimming with black spots. And when the fit finally subsided, he spat a thick, viscous saliva onto the hardwood floor. It was filled with them, a small, dark pile of at least 20 seeds, gleaming wetly in the pre-dawn gloom. He scrambled away from the mess, crab-walking backward until his back hit the leg of his bed, his breath coming in ragged, terrified sobs. The boundary between a strange anomaly and visceral horror had been crossed. There was no explaining this. There was no rationalizing a harvest. The next morning, haggard and sleep-deprived, he made an appointment with the doctor. He found Dr. online, a general practitioner with a calm, reassuring photo in an office a few blocks away. As he was leaving his apartment, Mrs. Gable opened her door, a bright, fixed smile on her face. "Oh, Alex, dear, you look peaky," she said, her eyes crinkling. "Is that tickle in your throat still bothering?" Alex froze, his hand on the doorknob. He hadn't told her about his throat. "I'm fine, Mrs. Gable, just a bit tired." "Well, you must take care of yourself," she chirped, holding up a small potted plant. It had strange, waxy leaves, a deep, unnatural green, and a single, thick stem. "I thought this might cheer you up, a bit of life in this dreary old place." He took it numbly. The ceramic pot was strangely warm. "Thank you. Just be sure it gets plenty of light. And the air in your flat is just perfect for it," she added, her gaze lingering on him for a second too long. "It should do very, very well." Dr. Harris was everything his photo promised, calm, paternal, and utterly dismissive. Alex, his voice trembling, recounted the story, leaving out the more bizarre details about the sounds in the walls and the taste of the water, focusing on the physical symptom. He even brought a few of the seeds in a small plastic baggie. The doctor examined him, listened to his chest, and peered at the seeds with a detached curiosity. "Unusual," Dr. Ayres murmured, rolling one between his thumb and forefinger. "The body can do strange things under stress, Alex. Have you been under a lot of pressure at work? Any significant life changes?" "No, nothing," Alex insisted, his frustration mounting. "This isn't stress. I'm coughing these up. They are real." Of course, the doctor said soothingly. "We'll run some tests, blood work, a sputum culture. I'll send one of these off to the lab as well. In the meantime, I want you to try and relax. I'll prescribe some multivitamins. Let's build your system up. It's likely a rare form of calcification, or perhaps a severe, localized allergic reaction to a fungus or pollen you've inhaled." He left the clinic feeling more isolated than ever. The doctor's placid skepticism made him feel like he was losing his mind. Was it psychosomatic? Was he so consumed by his own quiet loneliness that his body had invented a disease? He clung to that sliver of hope, the idea that this was a product of his own broken mind, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. But the horror would not be contained by his psyche. It began to bleed into the physical world in ways that defy all logic. He found a single black sheet resting on his pillow one morning, precisely where his head had been. He found another inside a sealed tub of yogurt he'd just opened. The most chilling discovery was in the shower. As the hot water soothed over him, he saw them, a small constellation of black seeds embedded in the grout between the tiles, as if they were sprouting from the very walls of the building. He stopped eating. The thought of food, of putting anything inside his body, filled him with a primal terror. What if it fed the thing inside him? He grew gaunt, his eyes sinking into dark, bruised hollows. His world had shrunk to the four walls of his apartment, which no longer felt like a home, but a cage or a womb. The plant from Mrs. Gable, however, was thriving. It had doubled in size in just over a week, its waxy leaves unfurling with an unnatural vitality. It seemed to love the humid, heavy air of the apartment. It grew towards its usual spot on the sofa, its leaves angled as if listening. Sometimes, when the light hit it just right, he thought he could see fine, thread-like filaments moving just beneath the surface of its leaves, like veins carrying a dark fluid. The rustling in the walls grew louder, more insistent. It was joined by a low, resonant hum from the air vents, a steady thrumming that he could feel in his teeth. It was a machine-like sound, yet it had a strangely organic quality, like the purr of some colossal, sleeping beast. He began to feel a strange, internal pulling sensation, a deep ache in his chest that felt less like pain and more like roots, a feeling of being anchored to something, of being drawn down into the very foundation of the building. His landlord, the elusive Mr. Henderson, made a rare appearance. Alex heard heavy footsteps in the hall and opened his door a crack to see the large, stoic man running a hand along the wall, his head cocked. "Everything all right, Mr. Henderson?" Alex asked, his voice a dry rasp. Henderson turned, his expression unreadable. "Just checking the building's integrity. Old pipes, you know, sometimes they sing." He gestured down the hall. "Got to make sure the circulation is good, that everything is flowing as it should." His eyes, small and dark, flickered to the interior of Alex's apartment before he gave a curt nod and continued down the stairs. The exchange left Alex trembling. Circulation, flowing, the words echoed the humid air and the humming vents. Pieces of a puzzle he couldn't assemble. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. The coughing had become a near constant affliction, each fit producing a small, rattling shower of seeds that he would sweep up and flush away with apathetic horror. He was sitting on the floor, staring at the thriving plant from Mrs. Gable, its waxy leaves gleaming with obscene health while he wasted away. A surge of furious, desperate energy coursed through him. It was a symbol of the entire nightmare. Her comment, "The air in your flat is just perfect for it," replayed in his mind, no longer sounding like a pleasantry, but a clinical observation. He lunged for it, his hands closing around the worn ceramic pot. He would smash it. He would destroy one piece of this encroaching madness. He lifted it high and brought it down against the edge of his coffee table. The pot shattered, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't the sharp crack of ceramic followed by the soft spill of soil. It was a wet, tearing sound. And instead of dirt and roots, a translucent, gelatinous matrix spilled onto the floor. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, and woven throughout it were countless fiber-optic filaments that glowed a sickly green. From the bottom of the shattered mass, a thin, black cable, no thicker than a phone charger, snaked out. Alex followed it with his eyes. It ran to the windowsill, where it disappeared into a small, perfectly drilled hole in the wood, leading down into the wall. The world tilted on its axis. The rustling, the hum, the taste of the water, the plant, it was all connected. It was a system. And he was part of it. A frantic, animal terror gave him a strength he didn't know he possessed. He scrambled to the wall where the cable had disappeared and tore at the wallpaper. It came away in a large, damp sheet, revealing not plaster, but a dark, porous material that looked like compressed peat, crisscrossed with the same glowing green filaments. He clawed at it, his fingernails digging into the spongy surface, and a section came loose. Behind it, in the space between the walls, was not empty air and insulation, but a dense, tangled web of thick, pulsating, root-like tubes. They glistened with moisture, and as he watched, one of them contracted, a peristaltic ripple moving down its length. The rustling sound filled the room, no longer muffled. It was the sound of a vast, living anatomy. He backed away, his mind dissolving into pure, shrieking static. He stumbled over to the main air vent and tore the metal grill from the wall. Inside was not a metal duct, but a wide, fleshy sphincter that pulsed gently in time with the hum that now seemed to fill the universe. It dilated slightly, and a puff of warm, humid, sweet-smelling air washed over his face. The air he had been breathing. He spun around, eyes wide with a terrible, dawning comprehension. The floor, he fell to his knees and tore at the corner of the cheap carpet. It peeled back easily, unnaturally so. Underneath was not a subfloor of old pine, but more of the dark, spongy, soil-like substrate, damp to the touch. His apartment was not an apartment, it was a planter box. A key turned in the lock, the door swung open. Mrs. Gable stood there, her kindly smile gone, replaced by an expression of weary disappointment. Beside her stood Mr. Henderson, his face a mask of stolid indifference. They stepped inside, their shoes making no sound on the exposed substrate. "The specimen has become agitated," Mrs. Gable said. Her voice flat and stripped of all its former warmth. "I told you the cognitive overlay was degrading." "It was ahead of schedule anyway," Henderson grunted, his eyes scanning the damage Alex had wrought. The fruiting cycle was unusually prolific. The nutrient solution must have been too rich. Alex stared at them, his throat working but no sound coming out. They weren't looking at him as a person. They were looking at him like a farmer looks at a crop that has bolted. Footsteps sounded in the hall, and Dr. Harris appeared in the doorway, holding a small, metallic case. He didn't look surprised at the scene, he looked clinical. "Full breach of the simulation," the doctor said, his voice as calm as it had been in his office. "A shame." The psychological pacification model was showing such promise. He looked at Alex, a flicker of something not pity, but perhaps academic interest in his eyes. "Specimen 744 点, your neural activity is erratic, but your biological functions are peaking. It seems your distress has triggered a terminal flowering." Specimen 744 点, the words didn't compute. His name was Alex. He had memories, a childhood, a first kiss, a dead-end job. The overlay is just a construct to ensure docility until maturation. Deeper, Eris explained, as if sensing his thoughts. A narrative to keep the host organism from questioning its environment. Your life, Alex, is the story we tell a plant to keep it from pulling up its own roots. It was then that Alex saw it, the subtle wrongness of them. The way Mrs. Gable's neck seemed just a little too long. The way Mr. Henderson's hands seemed to have one too many knuckles. The way dear Eris's eyes, when they caught the light, reflected it not as a pear, but as a glittering, compound surface. What am I? Alex finally whispered, the words scraping his raw throat. Mistress Gable stepped forward. You are the vessel, she said simply. And it is harvest time. As she spoke, a final, cataclysmic convulsion seized him. It was a cough that was not a cough. A deep, primal tearing that started in the soles of his feet and ripped its way up through his body. His jaw unhinged, he fell to his knees, his entire frame shuddering as a black, unstoppable torrent of seeds poured from his mouth. It was not a handful, not a pile, but a river. A cascade of millions of perfect, polished, obsidian tears that flowed onto the damp, dark floor of the terrarium he had called home. The pain was absolute, but underneath it was a strange sense of release. The feeling of roots deep inside him shriveling, of an anchor being lifted. His consciousness was freeing, the constructed memories of Alex dissolving like sugar in water. Through a haze of static, he saw them, the gardener, the technician, the biologist, moving with calm, methodical purpose. They were not gathering him, they were gathering his fruit. His vision tunneled. The last thing he saw was the window. The familiar view of the brick building across the street, the gray patch of sky above it. For a single, horrifying second, the image flickered, like a faulty projection. And in that blink, he saw what lay beyond. Not a city street, but a vast, cavernous darkness lit by a cold, alien light. It was a laboratory, or a nursery, stretching into an impossible infinity. Filled with row upon row upon row of identical windows, each a container for a single, solitary life. Each waiting for its own, final, terrible harvest.